We've covered the history. Now follow me down the rabbit hole about where the money was really going with the conspiracy theories behind the Rockefeller family. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we're finally getting into the conspiracy theories. I hope the last 2 weeks you guys have enjoyed the history behind the Rockefellers. There's a lot. I know that there's a lot. It doesn't stop there. There's so much when it comes to the Rockefeller family because there's like 6 or 7 generations of people that are just working in like the shadows, really. So let's get into these conspiracy theories, yeah? So the Rockefellers probably control our money. And I know what you're thinking. No, the Federal Reserve controls our money. Well, if you look into the history of the Federal Reserve, the Rockefeller name, it's not seen. You're correct. But that doesn't mean that John D. Rockefeller wasn't involved. The first meeting to talk about the banking reform happened November 1910 on Jekyll Island. And this came about because of the Panic of 1907. This was one of the many runs on the bank in our history. We'll go more into depth of all of these things in our Federal Reserve episode, which is coming soon, I promise. But basically, there was another run on the bank in 1907, giant panic because of an earthquake that happened in San Francisco. People freaked out. The theory basically states that Rockefeller, along with other powerful men, were behind the creation of the Federal Reserve in order to control the U.S. monetary system and manipulate the economy, which makes sense. If you don't know, the Federal Reserve implements policies that directly affect bankers and they print our money. After the panic of 1907 and the run on the banks looked to JP Morgan for help. So JP Morgan was like the bank guy, right? He wasn't the wealthiest man in the world, so he needed some help. So he looked to his friends for help because he's like, look, everyone's looking at me because I'm the bank guy. I need your help. One of those friends was John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller, the wealthiest man in the world, was much, much wealthier than JP Morgan. Some even go as far to say that every dollar that is printed is actually property of the Rockefellers. And the Rockefellers may have funded the Federal Reserve because they would get the money right from the source, so straight from the Federal Reserve. But as the money is distributed throughout the economy, it decreases its purchasing power. This is called the Cantillon effect. So basically, if you get water straight from the spigot, it's going to be pretty clean. But if it hits the ground and runs down and you're gathering it down the way, it's going to be pretty dirty water. Same concept with money. If you're getting money straight from the Federal Reserve, it has a higher purchasing power than after it's distributed throughout the economy. Our dollar's not really worth that much, right? We see this really hard in times like these right now that we see inflation really high. It's the same concept. I'm trying to do all these conspiracy theories in order of like timeline. So first we have the run on the banks because of the panic in 1907, right? Then, and we already know that Rockefeller had a monopoly on the oil industry and that he was really shady in his business dealings. That's not a conspiracy. That's just a fact, right? So we already covered that in his history. Next, we have the Flexner Report. And I know so many of you are excited about this specific conspiracy. There's a lot into it, so here we go. In the early decades of the 20th century, America saw a vast development in biomedical science, right? Well, why is that? In 1910, Abraham Flexner published a report on the medical system that was in place at the time. This report, the Flexner Report, was funded by the Carnegie Foundation, and it's also called the Carnegie Foundation Bulletin Number 4. If you're looking it up and you see both, it's known by both things. The purpose of this report was for medical school reform. So many schools at the time were run by like a few doctors, mostly for profit, and they only required the medical students to attend school for like 2 years. So really not that much training went into it. This report would enact like higher admission and graduation standards and more strict protocols of like mainstream science in their teaching. I don't really know what they're considering mainstream science, and I'm not even sure they really knew at the time. This report would require or would call for the requirement of a minimum prior education. So you had to have like kind of what we see today. So you have to have a degree before you can go to medical school. And then students would also be required to train for 2 years in human anatomy and physiology, and then they would go to 2 years of clinical work, which again is kind of like what we see today. The report talked about revamping and centralizing medical institutions, which is weird because I'm pretty sure we just talked about that with the Federal Reserve, how they were centralizing the banks. Why are they centralizing everything? But this report had consequences, as with everything. First, nearly half of the medical schools had to merge or were closed altogether. Any colleges in electrotherapy were closed. Homeopathy, traditional osteopathy, eclectic medicine, and physiomedicalism, which was like botanical therapies that hadn't been tested scientifically, they were all extremely ridiculed. Herbs, chiropractic care, massage, they were all demoted as quackery, basically. Anything that wasn't like what we see now as medical advice was thrown out, basically. In less than 10 years, the number of medical schools dropped from 650 to just 50 schools in the entire nation. And most of those 50 schools were financially supported by industrial companies. You know, the companies that stood to make a profit from them. Yep. So let's shut down the medical schools that were for profit and then send these kids to schools that are for profit. Anyway, let's talk about this for a second. I understand that modern medicine has helped with so many things. But for centuries before, natural medicine was working. I mean, not as well, but we're going back and forth here. I know I'm going to get some bad review about, the modern medicine is great. I'm not debating that. I'm just telling you the conspiracy theories. Today, they are more likely to push a synthetic drug on you instead of looking for things that could help you naturally, like natural herbs and things like that could actually help your body heal itself instead of having to take something that is completely unnatural to you to get better. There are plenty of cases when you need a synthetic drug to help you, but there's plenty of cases that you don't. And at this point, it kind of feels like the doctors aren't even thinking for themselves anymore. They're just like pushing whatever big pharma tells them to push this week, and every week it changes. And there are more sick people in the world than there ever have been before. And it seems like everyone that you know is suffering from something, and we just can't figure out like what the actual issue is. They never once thought to do more research and studies into the natural medicine of things. They just decided natural medicine just isn't working. Or someone else got involved and realized that there was real money in getting people sick and keeping them sick, or getting someone on medication and keeping them on medication. For reference, in 2003, a medical report stated that 783,936 people died from conventional medicine mistakes in the United States. 106,000 of these cases were from prescription drugs. And if you look it up today, it says only 250,000 people die each year from medical errors, which I hope that the number has dropped that drastically. My skepticism tells me that maybe they're just like padding their numbers. But medical error deaths is the third leading cause of death in America, by the way, in case you're curious about that. It does seem to be no coincidence that during the same time when the Flexner Report comes out, John D. Rockefeller is donating millions to medical schools. They were learning how to turn petrochemicals into pharmaceuticals. So basically they're turning oil into pills. Not like directly, but with chemical compounds and all the big brainy sciencey things. If you remember, just a year after the Flexner Report came out, they split Standard Oil because Rockefeller had the monopoly on oil, right? And he was not happy about this. In fact, he was pissed, and he promised to bankrupt America because of it. But he still had his fingers in the oil industry because he had lots of shares of lots of these different oil companies instead of it all just being one oil company. And with the Flexner Report saying that they needed to go away from natural medicine, Rockefeller saw his way in, and natural medicine became his number one enemy. He's like, if we can get rid of all natural medicine, I'll make more money. And that's why they've never put any research into like natural remedies and all these things. And then even today you hear people like, oh, I have a natural remedy, and people are like, oh, you're just crazy. Just go to the doctor, get a prescription, right? Because how much money is in pharmaceuticals? So much. So Rockefeller needed to control the narrative. So donating money to medical schools and creating his own medical school, Rockefeller University of New York, which is a medical school, means that he has control over the industry and control over what these doctors are learning and what the mainstream science is. By the way, Abraham Flexner's brother, Simon Flexner, was employed by the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. And later, Abraham became the first director of the Rockefeller philanthropy programs in medical education. And it is important to know that Abraham was not a doctor or a medical scientist in any way. He was just some educator that they hired to do the research into the medical schools. Founded by the Carnegie Foundation, and Carnegie and Rockefeller go way back. Way back. So, seems a little fishy to me. But I'm sure you're wondering why everyone just like changed and started following this new report. It's not like it's not like the government came and they were like, this is what you're gonna do. Except it kind of was. Because I was wondering the same thing. I was like, why all of a sudden Flexner's report came out and everyone's like, yep, that's what we're doing now. We're changing. Maybe it was peer pressure, but also this report's backed by the two richest men in America, Carnegie and Rockefeller. Not in that order, because Rockefeller had more wealth than Carnegie. Both very rich. And the police were present at every single school to enforce this new way of doing things. That's interesting. No medical schools to this day can be created without the permission of the government, and the medical research must fully adhere to the protocols of scientific research. Materialism, medication, and vaccination. In 1997, the World Health Organization adopted the Flexner Report and extended it worldwide because they're like, yep, it's working in America. Now the whole world needs to do this. Which seems to fit because around the same time you have David Rockefeller working to implement the New World Order. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Let's get through the Flexner Report before we get into the New World Order with David Rockefeller, because that dude, yeah, he was something, that's for sure. The U.S. spent $4.4 trillion on healthcare in 2022. As of 2019, Pfizer was the most profitable healthcare company, coming in at $6.3 billion, with Johnson & Johnson coming in second at $5.1 billion. But all the top 20 most profitable healthcare companies were in the multiple billions, with like the number 20 is still like $2 billion. But it's funny that Pfizer was the most profitable healthcare company before COVID. It was really important that I looked that up before 2020 because the COVID and all that stuff that came out, I didn't want that to like pad Pfizer's numbers. But Pfizer, I mean, even back in like 2001, Pfizer was the most profitable healthcare company. So they've been the most profitable healthcare company for a while now. But along these same lines, the Rockefellers fund a group called the American Type Culture Collection. And this was founded in 1925 as a national repository and distribution center for cultures of microorganisms, Basically, they store viruses, and when someone wants to study it, they send them that virus to study. Many people point to this organization as the culprit for Zika virus. So if you are looking up Rockefeller conspiracy theories, you might see that they invented the Zika virus. You guys know I don't like to debunk conspiracies. That's not my thing, you know? I just tell you the conspiracy, you debunk it on your own time, but I'm not totally sure on this one because there isn't a lot of like medication or vaccine or anything for this virus. So I don't really see like the motive behind them creating Zika. That doesn't mean that they're not creating other viruses and doing other weird things with this company or this group. I'm not totally sure on the Zika virus conspiracy. It just feels really far-fetched. But outside of him trying to run the medical industry, he's also trying to run the education around the entire country, not just in the medical schools. He funded the General Education Board. And on the surface, this seems like such a noble thing to do, right? Because you want everyone to have an education. Everyone should have the same opportunities. Absolutely. I'm all for that. But why was putting money into public school systems such a calling to Rockefeller? That just seems like he was in oil. Why are you into the education system? Indoctrination mostly, I think. Because if you can control the schools and mandate that every kid goes to school and you're controlling what they're learning, you can manipulate the country and even the world, really. You manipulate everything. And isn't it funny that the kids who don't fit into the system are labeled and medicated? And why are they medicated? So they can't think anymore. We need to stop these people from thinking or freely thinking, right? Because in school, you're encouraged to think, but think this way and do it like this. This is how I'm teaching it, and this is how you need to program your brain to do it.
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way. Menopausal and perimenopausal women, listen up. It's time to take control of your health and comfort, and Winona is here to help. Winona is a telemedicine company for menopause care who believes that your symptoms are real, important, and deserve to be taken seriously. And for many women, this starts with hormone replacement therapy. Winona's HRT is made with plant-based, bioidentical hormones rather than synthetic ones, so it better aligns with your body to offer relief from hot flashes, weight gain, and other uncomfortable symptoms. 80% of women who use Winona find relief within just 90 days. So, what are you waiting for? Get started today. Visit buywinona.com today to start your free visit. With free shipping and the ability to pause or cancel at any time, your path to wellness has zero obligations. Use code SPRING24 at buywinona.com for 25% off your first treatment plan. That's BYWINONA.com for 25% off. Winona. Menopause care made easy.
As if it's normal for like any child to just like sit around for 8 hours a day and like not do anything but like sit there and listen. Think about kindergartners, like 5-year-olds. They're supposed to just like sit down and listen. I know that's like they play and stuff. I get that. But it's just like super against what children want to do, which is run around and play. John D. Rockefeller once said, quote, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers," end quote. So if you're curious what his motivation was behind the General Education Board, that's exactly what it was. Thinkers will challenge the status quo, whereas workers will just like accept it for what it is and like, find their place in it. They're like, oh, well, this is just what it is. There's no changing it. I guess I'll just fit right in. because people want to fit in. Like, it's like natural for you to want to find your place in the world. A lot of people just find their place exactly where Rockefeller has told them to find it, even if they don't know that that's who's doing it. Intelligent citizens are super hard to govern. They will do their own research, they'll figure things out that you're hiding, and the Rockefellers had a lot to hide. But we're noticing this now with, and I don't want to get into COVID too much, but we're noticing this with the COVID vaccine. You have a bunch of people that just like blindly took it. They're like, yep, absolutely, give me that vaccine, even though it doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. I don't know, seems weird to me, but doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. You can still get COVID. But then you have all these people that are like, nope, I'm not going to do that vaccine. And everyone's like, oh my God, how could you think for yourself? The doctor said that it's good for you and it's fine. Well, now we're seeing people die from like heart issues. So I don't know. I digress. I will do an episode on traditional schooling because there's like so much that goes into it. But John D. Rockefeller and, imagine that, Andrew Carnegie were behind the education that we know of it today. Isn't it interesting that they're both behind the medical industry and our general education? That's not weird at all. Nope, that's totally normal. The oil and steel people of America decided to get into medical schools and education, public education. Anyway, neither here nor there. Rockefeller was involved in a coup. Yeah, you heard me exactly right. In 1933, Senator Prescott Bush, grandfather of George W. Bush and father of George H.W. Bush, teamed up with like many big corporations and the DuPont family to stage a military coup to take down FDR and install a fascist dictatorship. And this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is like a proven fact. I just found it when I was researching conspiracy theories and thought I would share it with you because, wow, right? So the purpose of this coup was to stop Roosevelt's like New Deal. The New Deal included new constraints and safeguards on the banking industry in an effort to get the nation out of the Great Depression. So it would do an amazing thing for the country, but it would hurt these corporations and these families, and they were like, we don't like that. So, of course, companies like Chase Manhattan Bank, Standard Oil, Goodyear, GM, they all wanted to stop this. Where the coup went wrong was when they asked Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler to lead the operation. They're like, you have done this, you've been in the Marine Corps for however many years, you've done this with so many other countries, can you lead this coup in our country? Well, that was stupid because Smedley Butler was a super outspoken FDR supporter. He loved him. So he quickly put an end to this charade. Conveniently, even though this was like quite treasonous, not one person got in trouble. And Prescott Bush's son and grandson went on to become the presidents of the United States eventually. I really will have to cover more families because like the Bushes, the DuPont family, the Rothschilds, like there's so many families I need to cover, but we're starting with the Rockefellers. Are they avoiding taxes? I think that any of us who look at any of this would be like, yep, for sure. So the Rockefeller family obviously has a very long history of philanthropy, which sounds great, but like, is it all a cover? So when people talk about this, they attribute it to like John D. Sr.'s mom instilling in him that he needs to give 10% to his church, even if they don't have very much money. And at the time, they didn't have hardly any money at all, and they still gave 10% to their church. But like, most families teach this. If you go to church, you are taught that you should give 10% back to your church, whether you have money or not. So, and not every family just like goes on to donate millions of dollars. I mean, most families don't have it, but you know what I'm saying? Obviously, we know at this point that he has ulterior motives, basically to everything. But was one of these motives evading taxes? Honestly, it makes a lot of sense. The Rockefellers donate money to trusts to avoid taxes, but still have control over their money. Trusts have certain tax benefits as well as like financial protections, there is this whole, it's not a theory because it's true. Um, they would each pull out a huge life insurance policy on themselves. When they died, the beneficiary of that life insurance policy was the trust. So when they died, all their money would go back into the trust, but the trust just keeps the money going to the next generation. And everybody can pull out loans from the trust, which is basically like a loan against their own life insurance policy. And when they die, their life insurance policy goes back into the trust to keep the money circulating throughout the family. Having trusts means that when the money goes to the next generation, they don't have to pay taxes on that. Putting real estate into trusts ensures the same thing. You don't have to pay taxes on it. It actually makes a lot of sense for everybody to be using trusts, but the Rockefeller family just like really capitalized on it. That's for sure. Okay, it should be no surprise to you or to anybody that the Rockefeller name has long been associated with the New World Order and the Illuminati. You knew I was going here. We all knew it was coming. Here we are. There are 13 families that control the world. These 13 families like head up the Illuminati. In alphabetical order, the families are the Astors, the Bundys, the Collinses, the DuPonts, the Freemans, the Kennedys, the Lees, the Onossises, the Rockefellers, the Russells, the Van Dunes, or Dines, I don't know how to say that, the Merovingians, I don't know if I'm saying that right either, and the Rothschilds. Not only was Rockefeller the first billionaire, but we see his family starting lots of institutions, lots of companies, right? They love to start companies. Well, David Rockefeller, what a fantastic guy. He started a company called the Trilateral Commission. So this is a global membership organization that brings together senior policymakers from Asia, North America, and Europe. That's why it's called trilateral, because you have those three continents that are represented. And now this commission wasn't established until John D. was like long and dead, right? David Rockefeller established it in 1973. I'm wondering if he did this because he was trying to like streamline the whole like Illuminati New World Order stuff. And he was like, well, let's create this commission and then we'll get together and people won't question it at all. We have like a reason to get together now because we have this commission where we're controlling the world from behind the scenes. David is a known internationalist, which basically means he's super pro New World Order. Everything should just be like one world, one government, one banking system, centralize everything. Which we've heard time and time again with John D. Rockefeller. David created this commission to address the challenges posed by the growing economic and political independence. It's of note, by the way, that the logo for the Trilateral Commission is 3 arrows that kind of like circle around and then point in towards each other. These arrows are making a triangle. Strangely enough, the Illuminati symbol is also a triangle. That's odd. The Trilateral Commission represents influential commercial and political interests. There are about 400 members ranging from figures in politics, business, media, you name it, they're probably there. In fact, each country from the 3 regions of the commission must hit a quota of members that reflect its relative political and economic strength. So this commission has been called the shadow government, the establishment, and the global elite. That's weird. I feel like we've talked about that before. It is said that the commission is behind the international drug trade and plotting constant tax raises on Americans with plans to just like ship it other places. Which like actually makes a lot of sense when you're looking at people in power in our country sending our tax dollars places that we don't necessarily want it to go. We want our tax dollars to go back to us, back to our country, doing things here, not going over to fight proxy wars. I'm talking about Ukraine. And I'm sure that's not the only example. That's just like the example that popped into my head like right now. So the first North American chairman of the Trilateral Commission was Gerald Smith, who was the former head of the U.S. Arms Control and Disarmament Agency and a chief U.S. negotiator for strategic arms limitations talks. So I'm sure they were eyeing our guns long before all of that. Another chairman included a former chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve Board. That's weird. At one point, the Asian charter chairman was the chairman and CEO of Sony. So you just have like major corporations, major players, all part of this commission. Presidents have been members of the commission to include George Bush, Bill Clinton, and Jimmy Carter. Other members include executives from AT&T, ITT, Xerox, Mobil, Exxon, Chase, GE, Pepsi, Nabisco, Nissan, Toshiba, Fiji Bank. You had people like Henry Kissinger, John D. Rockefeller IV, Katharine Graham, and Tom Bradley. And they do not have one professional athlete or celebrity on this commission because they only use the professional athletes and the celebrities, these people, to push out their agenda. But they aren't involved in the lawmaking or like the behind the scenes. Even though you can easily Google the Trilateral Commission, most people just like don't even know about it because they don't even know that should be looking for it. And even if you do Google it, you can go straight to the website and then you can, I don't know, like just believe what they say. Most people do. You go to the website, you don't read between the lines, you just look at what they say and you're like, yeah, it seems like they're doing great things. But like, what if they're not? Also, in one of my sources, it said you can literally call them and they'll tell you who showed up for the meetings. And I was like, cool, I'm going to do that. So then I went to the website. They did not have a phone number for the North American branch. They did have phone numbers for the European and Asian branches. So I have a friend that kind of lives close to there. And I was like, hey, how frequently are you in Washington, D.C.? Can you go to this building and see if the Trilateral Commission is actually in this building or if it's just all a cover? She's not in Washington, D.C. enough for it to matter. But if any of you are and you want to help me out, I'm really curious if they're actually there or if it's just all a facade, because I have this stinking suspicion that you can't actually call them. They won't actually tell you anything because who are you? Why does it matter? Why are you looking into this? That's how you get suicided, actually, so maybe we shouldn't do that. But honestly, the more and more I do research, the more I find that the deep state is actually running the world, not in secret, but in plain sight. Like, you can easily look up the Trilateral Commission. You know what else you can easily look up? The Bilderberg Group. If you have ever looked into the Rockefellers, this is probably one of the first things that's come up, as well as the Trilateral Commission. It's also known as Bilderberg Meetings. This was formed in 1954 as a forum for informal discussions to foster dialogue between Europe and North America. And that is coming right from their website, bilderbergmeetings.org. So this meeting happens yearly with about 130 leaders in politics, industry, finance, academia, media, whoever else is influential at that moment. We're talking former heads of the MI6, the CIA, prime ministers from several different countries, the head of the International Monetary Fund, executives from BP, Google, LinkedIn, Airbus, Shell, HSBC, people from the World Economic Forum. They invite journalists. So this is an invite only type of meeting, informal discussion, which is different from the Trilateral Commission where they have to hit like a certain quota. You don't have to hit a quota for this. This is an invite only type of meeting, and it's very, very private. You don't get to talk about anything that happens there. But they do invite journalists. Then they've had journalists from like NBC, the Washington Post, the Economist. These people like attend, but they are not allowed to write about the meeting. They're only allowed to be there and observe, which at first I was like, that makes no sense. Why would you invite journalists? Journalists are going to want to report on things. That's literally their whole job. Then I realized why they do this. So they invite these journalists so they know what's coming down the line and they can be on top of the news, basically. They get the scoop before anybody else because they're like, oh, it's July 31st. Tomorrow there should be this thing that happens this part of the world. So let's go ahead and write this story and get it all queued up. They can be the first people to turn it into their editors and be the first on the scene. That makes a lot of sense. So they don't necessarily need to write about what's going on at the meeting because they already know what's going to happen in the world before the rest of the world knows. It's funny how we always are pointing to the World Economic Forum as the New World Order, but we neglect the Bilderberg Group and Trilateral Commission. And it's not just you guys, it's me too. I've been doing this. So this is all interesting. Again, straight from the website, it says, the meetings are held under the Chapman House Rule, which states that participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers nor of any other participant may be revealed. That's straight off their website. I just copied it and pasted it right here. So these journalists can use the information. They have this information. They can't report on it. They can't say where they got the information or who gave it to them. Cannot reveal their sources, but they can use it to their advantage. But so can all these other executives and world leaders. What's funny is every year they pick a new location to have these meetings, or this meeting, the Bilderberg meeting. But they always pick really obscure locations. So they're not picking locations that you would normally see a group of influential people in the world gathering. They're going to pick a place that you would never expect that they would gather. And that's where they do it. And it changes every year. So you would never be like, oh, they're going to come back to this place. We figured it out. Nope. Next year's going to be different. Now, if all this isn't screaming New World Order or Illuminati, I really don't know what does. But of course, it just feels like conspiracy theories follow around the Rockefellers, because now we're going to talk about the World Trade Center. Yep. 9/11 happened. The trade centers went down. Who built these trade centers? I know we talked about this in the 9/11 episode, right? But let's go all the way back to before they were built. David Rockefeller was one of the earliest advocates of building the World Trade Centers in New York. So the center was owned and operated by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, but David knew he needed the funding from the public for such a large project, and especially how many buildings are there when you talked about the World Trade Center? So he approached the Port Authority about this particular build. If you remember, this is going to get a little weird, so follow me here. So David's niece, her name is Abigail. She was the daughter of Abby. So David's older sister, Abby, or Babs for short. She had a daughter named Abigail. Abigail married George Dorr O'Neill, if you're following me here. So George Dorr O'Neill, he is married into the family, but he was also the commissioner of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey from 1991 to 1999. And I don't believe that this is any coincidence, because in 1993, they tried to take down the World Trade Center. I don't know if many people even know about this. It's been so long, and honestly, I was born after this, so I would have never known, but it's probably out of people's heads now. So there was a van bomb that detonated below the North Tower. The hope was to make the North Tower fall into the South Tower, and then both towers would collapse. Obviously, we know for a fact that did not work. They needed a lot more explosives, and they got them. But this particular bomb and attempt to bring down the towers did kill 6 people, one of which was pregnant, and it injured over 1,000 people. The key witness in the case testified that the bomb was built under FBI supervision. And they convicted 4 people of this, and they were all Arabic. So it's weird how they just really wanted to take down our World Trade Center. I don't understand how every time something happened to the World Trade Center, they were Arabic. Anyway, so they've been trying to take down these towers for years before they were actually successful. I don't know how many attempts happened outside of this van bomb and outside of 9/11 happening, but I think that basically O'Neill stopped being the commissioner in 99 This is just a theory. I have no idea. But I think that he stopped being the commissioner because it could separate. There's like a line of separation between the Rockefeller family and when the World Trade Centers actually went down. It is just weird that the Rockefeller name is just like all over this. And in one of my sources, they even said that the towers were nicknamed David and Nelson because at the time when the towers were built, Nelson was the governor of New York, and David obviously was heavily involved, being one of the biggest advocates for building this trade center. I could not find specifically, I have thoughts, I have theories, but I could not find facts to back up or evidence to back up my theories. Basically, the question is, why did David want to destroy the World Trade Center? Or why did the Rockefellers not want the World Trade Centers anymore? What was behind that? But also, they were in cahoots with the Bush family. I mean, there is a long history there, right? With the coup that John D. Rockefeller was involved in with Prescott Bush. George H.W. Bush was president when the van bomb explosion happened, and George W. Bush was president when 9/11 happened. So there's got to be something there. I haven't, with evidence, connected the dots. I have obviously connected some dots in my head, and you guys can connect the dots all you want. I know some of you get mad if I don't lay it out, but use your brain here, yeah? Like, I didn't find the evidence to connect all the dots there. Anyway, David, like I said in last week's episode, he was a guy for sure, and he was involved in a lot of things. We thought John D. Rockefeller was involved in a lot of things. Man, this apple does not fall far from that tree, because he may or may not have been involved in the JFK assassination as well. So it is said that a number of people, like J. Edgar Hoover, Lyndon Johnson, Jack Ruby, Richard Nixon, other deep state elites, all met on November 21st, 1963, so literally the day before the assassination, to discuss the assassination. With Johnson stating, quote, "After tomorrow, these goddamn Kennedys will never embarrass me again," end quote. But David Rockefeller was the final nod in the plan. And people still point to the CIA and say that David couldn't have been involved because the CIA did it and it was Lyndon Johnson. And I agree with all those things. Don't get me wrong. We covered all this in the Kennedy episode, right? But if you remember from last week, David Rockefeller was really good friends with several heads of the CIA. And in fact, he was often briefed on things that they were doing. So he was like a de facto head without actually being the head of the CIA. What I find really interesting, though, so when you look up David, there's a couple names that are specifically mentioned, a couple CIA directors that are specifically mentioned as being friends with David. These couple CIA directors are directly before and directly after the director that is in charge of the CIA during the assassination. As if he had no connections to the CIA during the assassination, but he was friends with the director right before and right after. Seems fishy, but I don't know. So technically, I mean, there is no direct connection. If you listened to my JFK episodes, you know that Kennedy was going to release way too much information. He was basically going to tell all, and David Rockefeller just could not have that. You can't talk. Shut up. And they couldn't control Kennedy, I think, so they killed him. So I tried to do all these conspiracy theories in order of the oldest person in the family down to the youngest. So the next one I have is just kind of, I thought it was just kind of like a fun thing I'd just throw in there. It is said that Nelson Rockefeller fathered another child outside of his children. If you remember, he has 5 children with his first wife, Mary. Then him and Mary got divorced. He then married Margaretta Large Fittler, but she already had 2 children from her previous marriage. Well, it is a known family secret. You know how every family has like a secret, everyone knows about it, but nobody really talks about it. So it's a known Rockefeller family secret that Nelson was more than likely the father of Melinda Fitler Murphy, who was one of Margaretta's children from her first marriage. So Melinda was said to be the child of Nelson's second wife, Margaretta, and her first husband, Dr. James Slater Murphy. But because Nelson was frequently cheating on his first wife, there is heavy speculation that he was actually the father of Melinda instead of Dr. Murphy. And that's what led to Dr. Murphy and Margaretta's divorce in the first place. Although none of this is confirmed. It just seems that's kind of where that went. And then, I mean, him and Margaretta went on to have 2 kids of their own, but Melinda might also be his child. And last but not least, let's get into climate change. Yep, you heard that correctly. So David Kaiser, who is David Rockefeller's grandson, funded an investigation into ExxonMobil's environmental malpractices, which is rich coming from the Rockefeller family. Am I right? Like, come on. But what's even worse is that there were several activist groups funded by the Rockefeller Family Fund to kick off the campaign #ExxonKnew. This campaign was accusing Exxon of downplaying the threat of climate change coming from them. But, like, don't these activist groups know where the money they're receiving is coming from, and that it's coming from a family funded by oil and that started the oil industry? Like, I don't know. Maybe they just don't care that they're being hypocritical, but whatever. Using the evidence provided by the Rockefeller-funded investigation, several states, cities, and individuals sued ExxonMobil for environmental practices. People point to this as a way that Kaiser was trying to change what his family has done, and that, like, he's done more good for the climate control topic than most people have ever. But I don't know. I just feel like the Rockefellers never do anything for, like, the good of it. There's always, like, a sinister reason behind it. I haven't found out exactly what the purpose was. And maybe this sounds negative of me, but I've done a lot of research into the Rockefeller family at this point, and I haven't seen them do anything for the greater good without some sort of personal gain on the back end. So I'm sure I'm missing plenty of conspiracy theories. I'm sure there's tiny little conspiracy theories just like throughout their family's history, because there's so many of them, and they're all up to something. But I think we hit the big ones for sure. But thank you guys for hanging out with me with these 3 episodes of the Rockefeller family. And until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I'll see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's @rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.